lizard's DNA confirms your theory. The creature's a living fossil. Under the circumstances, I'm going to allow your exploratory mission into the anomaly.
I'm taking the lizard back. Creatures that don't belong here should be returned to their natural habitat.
It's a disclaimer. We don't want any nasty lawsuits if you don't come back.
In 1999, Tim Haines and Jasper James created the 6-part documentary Walking With Dinosaurs, which used then advanced special effects to bring dinosaurs to life in a David Attenborough-style nature show. It was a big success, and led to Haines and James creating Impossible Pictures, a production company creating media based around dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. For a while, the company stuck primarily to the documentary through CGI idea, bringing extinct creatures to life so that we can marvel at the majesty of them. But 6 years after Walking with Dinosaurs, something happened. Doctor Who came back. It was almost a guarantee that Doctor Who would return someday. The name had become an institution in British science fiction circles. Star Trek will eventually come back, Star Wars will eventually come back, Doctor Who will eventually come back. But what wasn't a guarantee was if the 2005 Doctor Who revival would be good or a success. It was both, and kicked off a new wave of British genre television. Impossible Pictures was going to get in on that, with Haines and James splitting up to create 2 dinosaur-themed genre shows to compete in this revived market. Jasper James' effort was 2006 Prehistoric Park, with wildlife presenter Nigel Marvin using a time machine to collect extinct species and transport them to a nature preserve in modern times. In many ways, this was playing it safe, building on ideas the company had produced before, with one foot still in the CGI nature documentary that made Impossible Pictures' name, with the other foot in time travel science fiction. Prehistoric Park only ran for one 6-episode series. Tim Haines, on the other hand, went all in on a science fiction action-adventure program with 2007's Primeval. The premise, as presented in the show's pilot episode, is such. A number of temporal anomalies are opening up across the UK, portals between our modern world and random points in the distant past. Prehistoric creatures start to wander into our world and cause havoc, getting the attention of Nick Cutter, played here by Scottish Jeremy Renner, a professor of paleozoology whose wife Helen had disappeared 8 years prior and is now presumed dead. He's joined by lab technician and action man Stephen Hart, paleontology student and computer nerd Connor Temple, and zookeeper Abby Maitland. They end up running headlong into the Home Office, run by Claudia Brown and Mr. Frowny, eventually coming under their employee in attempts to understand the anomalies and deal with whatever creatures come out of them, and then later figure out how Helen plays into all of this. That's how it starts anyway. As the show progressed over the next 5 years, it built up a convoluted Sliders-esque mythology of alternate timelines, mysterious artifacts, advanced technologies, old characters dying, new characters coming on board, and just general conspiracy. At the heart of it, though, this is a show about a bunch of people running away from dinosaurs. And I hate it. Okay, maybe hate's a strong word, but I could not stand Primeval. I cringed through all of the show I could stand to watch. And no, not because of the dated CGI. I don't care about old special effects. They don't bother me. What bothers me are the unlikable characters, sloppy plotting, skin-crawling dialogue, and the use of the show's female characters as motivators for the male characters. Yes, it's gonna be one of those videos. This is one of those shows where everybody being mean to each other stands in for actual rapport. Nick thinks that his missing wife being involved precludes him from having to work as a team, struggling around with a sense of I know best, when he often doesn't. One scene in the first series shows him playing golf in his office with a fossil, which is the best possible image ever to represent smug superiority. Steven is a quiet, brooding macho man who rolls his eyes at everybody. In this scene in the first episode, Connor is showing off his very useful database of prehistoric animals that he created.
This database contains constantly updated information on all non-extinct vertebrates. I've been building it every spare second since I was 14.
It's impressive.
It's pretty cool, huh?
And slightly sad.
Steven, you're a lab technician. You work at the university. All your friends are scientists. This is your life. You would probably spend some time working on an animal database. Shut up! Abby is probably the most likable character of the bunch, and she ends up kidnapping a wild prehistoric flying lizard as a pet and keeps it a secret for as long as possible. And then there's Connor. Oh, Connor. Fedora-wearing, woman-leering, obnoxious nerd stereotype. And worst of all, he has an entire circle of toxic friends, throwing around clumsy pop culture references and being leery and gross.
I swear on my Empire Strikes Back first edition poster signed by Luke Skywalker and Dave Prowse.
Ooh, careful, that's invoking a sacred relic.
Yeah, like the Bible. Yeah, I know what a sacred relic is, Duncan. I have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Sounds like someone's been overdoing the PlayStation.
I can prove it.
That's the saddest thing I've seen since Matrix Revolutions.
I should point out that this series premiered the same year as Big Bang Theory. I guess 2007 was the year for gross misogynistic nerd characters as protagonists. The woman characters in this show largely serve as motivation for the men. Abby has very little involvement with the actual plots, the least useful member of the four-person team, and instead is there to serve as part of a love triangle. She pines for Steven, Connor pines for her. I couldn't care one little bit. The reason for her kidnapping, the little lizard character, was partially to give the show a mascot, but also as an excuse to show us Abby in her underwear whenever she's in her apartment, since she turns up the heat to keep the creature alive. She's in her underwear a lot, and Connor is in her apartment a lot, looking at her a lot. Claudia's role in the show is to mostly be a flustered and ineffectual representation of the government, trying to give orders but ultimately getting overruled by civilians who are not even on the government's payroll. She gets damseled once and becomes a love interest for Nick before the timeline changes and she's wiped out of existence, motivating Nick's actions in this series too. I don't think I've ever seen a woman fridged by time travel before. No messy body to clean up. Helen is the nearest thing the show has to an antagonist, though she's more of a selfish anti-hero, but mostly, again, she's motivation for Nick. Helen is what causes Nick to act irrationally, disobey the home office in his attempts to pursue her. Then, in the last episode of Series 1, she plays the homewrecker card, because women, am I right? The series can't keep track of all the plot elements it introduces and forgets about half of them. In the first episode, Helen leaves a live ammonite on Nick's desk, but it's never seen or mentioned about again. I mean, put that thing in a fish tank at least. In episode 3, Nick determines that the anomalies are opening up along fault lines, which never factors into the story again after that episode. In episode 4, the protagonists discover a hill covered in anomalies, like a junction spot for all of this time traveling, but we never see it again. This feels like a show that didn't have a show Bible. It was a make-it-up-as-you-go-along science fiction plot that couldn't keep itself straight. Also, dialogue like this.
The anomalies are conclusive proof that the past exists.
Did anyone think the past didn't exist? Was the past just a theory? What are we talking about, Nick? They were really proud of this line. They used it multiple times in promotional material and those previously on Primeval bits at the beginning. This was the show's tagline for a bit. I only got through a series and a half before calling it quits and filling in the rest of the details with fan wikis, which probably makes this the least professional video I've done here in a long while, but, life is short. But I won't let that stop me from making odd, genre-spanning observations. So, what is Primeval, anyway? Where exactly does it fit in the world of science fiction? Yes, it's a show created as a response to Doctor Who, mainstream science fiction television with a former pop star in the lead female role. But in terms of plot, it more closely resembles the Doctor Who spin-off Torchwood. Both are shows about UK organizations dedicated to facing off against dangers that fall through sci-fi portals. If you were to compare Primeval to Doctor Who, you would probably have to go back to the 1970s, with the third Doctor finding himself stranded on modern Earth, where he ends up working with UNIT, a military organization set on investigating and combating paranormal and extraterrestrial threats. There's even an episode involving dinosaurs running around modern London that plays like a direct ancestor to Primeval. With these three examples, we find ourselves touching on a pretty substantial subgenre of science fiction, that of the organization established to combat or otherwise deal with the supernatural. This subgenre had something of a boom in the 90s with pop sci-fi like The X-Files and Men in Black and maybe Power Rangers if you squint, and continued with shows like Warehouse 13, Fringe, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm of course talking about when those organizations are the protagonists of the story. Shady groups suppressing the truth are more often the antagonists. Groups like this are the ultimate expression of distrust in the state. Secretive organizations with unlimited resources, keeping vital information out of the hands of the public for their own mysterious ends. Fictionalized versions of real-world anxieties over secret societies and conspiracy. So, It's weird, right? How these kind of organizations can be framed as both the good guys and the bad guys. What is fundamentally different about UNIT and, say, The Company from Heroes? Both keep track of and put a lid on supernatural activity, often resulting in gruesome bloodbaths. But UNIT is seen as an extension of British stiff upper lip post-World War II patriotism. It's almost nostalgic for Winston Churchill. And while the Doctor often comes in conflict with their methods, the Doctor being more of a mercurial anarchist type, the show ultimately favored the virtues of the state. UNIT had some rough edges, but the Brigadier is charming and ultimately their actions for the greater good, right? An organization like the Company isn't framed as an extension of nationalist identity, but rather the suppression of individual liberties. It's about capturing people with supernatural abilities without due process and using them to their own ends. But isn't containment, however unethical, more ethical than UNIT just going in and blowing up the place? The third UNIT story ever has them basically commit genocide against helpless prehistoric lizard people. And while the Doctor calls it murder, he continues to work with UNIT like it was just a foul ball and not something totally damnable. I think this line from Men in Black gets to the heart of the matter.
Humans, for the most part, don't have a clue. They don't want one or need one either. They're happy. They think they have a good bead on things.
Well, why the big secret? People are smart. They can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
Ultimately, the moral idea of secret organizations fall into the spectrum of the greater good versus individual liberties. The good guy versions of these organizations tend to be those with exceptional individuals, protecting a large faceless populace. The bad guy versions are about hazy, ill-defined groups attacking individuals caught in a vast, bigger picture. And this idea does apply to Primeval, but in a pretty interesting way, as our four main protagonists are, shall we say, independently contracted with the secret government organization, but are not actually part of the secret government organization itself. The actual Home Office does fit the faceless organization model, sort of, with their bands of anonymous soldier types, but they're shown to be so bland that you can't really take them seriously. Boring office spaces, overlit boardrooms, they seem less involved in the supernatural and more involved in the prices of imported pears. Yes, I know the Home Office is an actual government body in the real world, but American media makes the FBI look sexy. You can potentially do the same thing with the Home Office. Our four main protagonists, who do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to the dinosaurs spilling out into our world, remain civilians throughout Series 1, constantly on call from the Home Office, but not bound to the Home Office. Less the X-Files and more the lone gunman. Not only was the show about strong individualism, it was about strong individualism in the face of a boring, bureaucratic version of government conspiracy, telling them to sit down and shut up and let the people who know what they're doing take care of this. In essence, Primeval is less Torchwood and more this.
And how many ghosts have you caught, Mr. Fink? I'm not at liberty to say. And where do you put these ghosts once you catch them?
Into a storage facility.
And would this storage facility be located on these premises?
Yes.
And may I see this storage facility?
No.
Just to be clear, my comparison to Ghostbusters is in terms of structure and theme, not quality. Primeval is not worth the ground Ghostbusters walks on. But like Primeval, Ghostbusters is about intelligent, hardworking civilians getting together and coming up with inventive solutions to supernatural threats while butting heads with bureaucracy. The only major broad strokes difference is that Primeval crew end up actually working with the bureaucracy, however reluctantly. It's like if the Ghostbusters teamed up with Walter Peck to fight Gozer at the end of the film. Both Ghostbusters and Primeval have a bit of a libertarian edge to them, and since Primeval also has a foot into the organization covering up the supernatural bucket, what it shakes to is libertarianism as an answer to the shady secret society. The Illuminati have a harder time functioning in a world of fewer regulations, fewer controls, and less leverage against people when they can be empowered individuals, solving problems through science and ingenuity and not having to answer to the state. These are people the secret societies would have trouble controlling. This is what I read from Series 1, anyway. Unlike Ghostbusters, whose libertarian politics were very intentional, it's not clear how much the look at my computer dinosaurs guy thought that through. If he did, however, he didn't like it, because at the end of Series 1, the timeline gets altered. On top of wiping out Claudia, it changed the home office into the Anomaly Research Center. The bland office building is transformed into a crazy Bond villain lair, and our heroes are more directly working for them. The individual powers of the characters are reduced in favor for a more pulpy comic book style organization. I'd say it was a big loss, but everything else about this show was so bad that I wouldn't recommend it anyway. It losing its one vaguely interesting thematic element in favor of theatrics really feels in line with everything else. Primeval is garbage entertainment in the worst sense. Unintelligent, gross, and self-defeating. Maybe the general quality picks up past the point I couldn't bring myself to watch, but that won't get rid of the broken foundation the show is built on. But hey, if we don't have bad shows, we'll never learn how to make good shows, right?